those who, I suppose most of you know that I'm an ex-member of the club. I still use a friendly for the club. My name is Tom Hughes, call sign is VK2HUZ. That's all uniform Zulu. I've been more involved with boats and radios in boats than I have with amateurs, but early this year we went down to Tasmania and had quite an exciting time in some ways. There's a chart here of Eden to Tasmania and around if you want to have a look at it later and ask any questions. But Lyndenne was a boat that I fell over. When you buy a boat, you normally have an intention before you start that you're going to go and look for a boat to buy. That's normally where you start. Well, I was sent down to the College of Knowledge from Sydney Ferries to do a course down there. Many years previously I'd been involved with, as a customs officer in the seizure of a vessel. That vessel had become a customs launch after I left customs, and then when customs had finished with it, it was handed on to the so-called College of Knowledge, the Maritime College. So when I went down there, I asked if this vessel, which is a 44-foot fiberglass motor cruiser, was still about down there, or who was responsible for it, and I was immediately pointed to him. He's its mother. So I went and spoke to Peter Hunt, and he was very interested and said yes. He said, I look after it, you can't see it this time down here because you don't have time, but which was a shame. But he said, if you come down on holidays, give us a ring and we'll make sure you see it. So that's what happened in October '05. We were down, my wife and I had a bit of a week's holiday around the north end of Tasmania, particularly the northwest, but ended up in Launceston, and went and had a look at this boat that he'd had tricked up for training the islanders for their patrol boats with 96-mile radar and the big gyro compass that you find in a big ship. So as I was walking off the wharf, I said to him, "Oh," I said, "that's a nice looking boat." It was the next boat to it on the marina. He said, "Yeah, it's a deceased estate." He said, "The fellow committed suicide," and he said, "It's for sale at the moment." I walked back to the car, and my dear wife, who was sitting there knitting, patiently waiting for me, said, "That's a pretty boat." I said, "Yeah, it's for sale. It's a deceased estate." She said, "We could buy it." That was the way I ended up getting hold of this boat. I didn't go to Tasmania looking for a boat to buy. It was the last thing on my mind, quite frankly, because we'd owned a boat, a number of boats previously, but the last one had been in a charter fleet down at Newport, and we'd burnt our fingers a little bit with the tax department, and it said, "No, you can't claim anything more on tax on it." And we sold it. And decided not to get another boat until I retired. Well, I hadn't retired, but we'd had a couple of problems in the family with sudden illnesses, and my dear wife said, "Well, maybe we'd better start a bit earlier before you retire in case we have medical problems or the like and can't enjoy it." So I did just some due diligence, checked and looked around at what else was for sale around the same price or quality and so on, and ended up finding this was as good as anything, and one of the appealing things, it had a nice high rail around the side, thinking of grandchildren. But anyway, let's get on with the story. The vessel was called Lyndenne, and we get off one. That was its launching. It was launched on the 24th according to the paper, 24th, it was actually the 22nd of February. Saturday, it's 22nd of February 1947. And the girl down here is Lyndenne. The 45-foot Hugh and Pine fishing boat Lyndenne, which was launched at Prince of Wales Bay on Saturday. The boat has a beam of 12 feet and draws 6 feet. The vessel was built by Mr. Bernie Berkshire, who could neither read nor write, for Mr. Rupert Den, who will be used for cray fishing. And the bottom is a photo of Lyndenne. That was Rupert at sea, with cray pots all around him. You'll notice there's no wheelhouse on the boat. I have the original tiller that he's got his hand on there at home. And the boat was built to sail to work. 46 foot long and an 18 horsepower Lister diesel in it. Now that was taken around on the west coast of Tasmania. He used to sail around there every week or so looking for crayfish. He must have made quite a good deal out of it because he kept a family on it. And that's looking into the wet well. The boat had a wet well in the middle, even when I bought it, with 200 holes. These lighter green spots here are holes through the bottom, a watertight box in the middle of the boat to keep the crayfish in, to keep them alive, to take them to market. That's the first wheelhouse they put on it. That wheelhouse went on after being around for about 5 years. That's as she is today. That photo was taken off Baron Joey in 2011.
When you say wheelhouse, there would have been a proper steering wheel instead of the tiller.
That has now, yes.
Then, when they put the first wheelhouse on.
Yes, yes, and I actually also tracked down the first wheel because it's not got the original wheel on it now. But I'm not allowed to have that. It's on somebody else's boat. Now this is off Baron Jones. On the 7th of January we left Newport bound for Hobart, and the first night left at 10 o'clock in the morning. 10 o'clock at night, it was blowing quite a hard northeaster, which was getting a bit uncomfortable, so we put into Jervis Bay at midnight. Left at 8 o'clock in the morning and headed south. There was a southerly forecast, so we thought, well, we'll make Ulladulla, which will be a bit more comfortable. But the southerly was late, so we carried on to Bateman's Bay and anchored behind Snapper Island. Over there in the background you see the bar. There wasn't enough water on the bar for us to get in, and in retrospect it was just as well we didn't go in there. But Snapper Island's got some interesting rock formation on it, and that's one of the cliff faces. If anyone is into geology at all. That's Montague Island.
I see a lighthouse.
Sorry?
I see a lighthouse.
I think we've spoken to them in the past.
Every week.
Yeah.
Gaybo Island. Before we got there we had 4 days in Eden waiting for a weather window to go across Bass Strait. We didn't go across Bass Strait, we stayed in the Tasman Sea because we didn't go really west of a line between Eden and northeast Tasmania, so we didn't really go across Bass Strait, we stayed to the east of Bass Strait. Bass Strait gets very shallow down to about 60 to 80 metres deep, whereas where we were it was a couple of thousand metres further out to the east. This is the Hazards Freycinet Peninsula. Then 8 o'clock in the morning, we left Eden at 8 o'clock in the morning, 48 hours later went into Wineglass Bay on the east coast of Tasmania for breakfast, anchored for breakfast. Cape Pillar. Now, what's the next one? No, we go back there. Cape Pillar is on the southern tip of Tasmania, just off there, and I should have got slightly further around is Tasman Island. The channel between the two is about 150 metres wide and from 80 to 100 metres deep. On either side it shallows up to 7 metres in the centre of the channel. So you don't go through there when there's a big sea running because it could be exciting.
Scrape.
No, it's not so much scrape, but the waves will build up like a bombora, and it would get big breaking waves right through there. Then we went up for the Wooden Boat Festival. That's the Julie Burgess. That's also an old cray fishing boat that was been largely rebuilt, and friends of mine have worked on it, and it's now based up in Devonport and does sailing cruises and charters out of Devonport on the north coast. Storm Bay, that's another fishing boat, doing very well there with the top still up. She's doing about 10 knots that morning. Now this is the sail pass for the opening of the Wooden Boat Festival that we went down for. That's a few details about Storm Bay, but it was interesting when we went into Hobart from the east coast in through just north of Tasman Island there. We went in, it was quite amazing, because as we went in the sun was setting on the horizon, it was just sunset, and the sun was right on the bow of the boat as it went down. It was. And then just inside there, there's a big bay with Port Arthur runs off up to the north, and it was like a washing machine because the waves were all, it was about 3 metres swell, but it was bouncing off all the cliffs all the way around, so the sea had absolutely no direction, 3 metres high going every which way, so it was a bit of a rough trot for 9 miles or an hour and a half, because we were doing about 6 knots. Which equates to, well, say, very close to 10 kilometres an hour. Then we snuck up and found a sheltered place to anchor for that night, a place called Newbina. And when we got up to Hobart the next morning, lunchtime the next day, there was somebody there to meet us, and I said, "How did you know we were here?" He said, "You were seen this morning at Newbina." So, but Lyndenne is a very, very well-known boat down there. A lot of it was absolutely mind-blowing. The people that came up to me. Yeah, that's us in Victoria Dock, which is next to Constitution Dock. That's where I was for the Wooden Boat Festival.
Got line on us.
Sorry?
It's like you got line on us.
No, yeah, but this is the another boat that came down for the Wooden Boat Festival. It's currently just gone past here heading north. It was built in Melbourne about 2008. It's about 60 foot long, and it's a copy of a Portuguese caravel from the 15th, 16th century. Now that's the Russian boat, the Rusich, a Viking longboat, and they sailed it out from the Black Sea, and they're in Brisbane for a while on the way down to Hobart. They're held up by paperwork and financial problems, but they actually got into Storm Bay the morning of the opening sail pass for the Wooden Boat Festival. Now there's a challenge for you, steam outboard. I believe it's one of only 2 in the world. The steam launch Huon. It's all Huon pines. It looks absolutely spectacular. And the first time I saw this boat, we were up at Launceston when we were doing a lot of work on Lyndenne before we brought her up to Sydney. And I saw this boat on go past on a trailer with the boiler lit and belching smoke as it went past on the trailer. He was preheating the boiler so it was ready to steam off when he hit the water. But that boat has been up to Sydney for the Darling Harbour Boat Festival.
Sailed
Boat
to Sydney?
Festival. No, they brought up in a trailer.
I'll say.
Then Sally, me and Lyndenne. When I was doing a lot of work on the boat when I first bought it, we took the wet well out and did a lot of work in the hull, put 18 new planks in it. I was asking a lot of questions about the history of the boat, and eventually somebody gave me Lynn's email address. So I sent her an email saying that I'd just bought this boat, which I understood had been her father's, and would like some information about the history of it. But as a rider, I said, if you find this email offensive or you don't want to talk about it, please reply and you'll never hear from me again. About 2 days later, I got the most excited reply back, because she and her sister Sally had been following it. They'd been brought up on it, they loved the boat, and they'd been following it for years. Then they'd lost track of it and they'd found it again. So this is down in Hobart. Lynn lives up in Rockhampton these days, and I told her I was going down for the Wooden Boat Festival. Her sister Sally lives down just out of Hobart, so she flew down from Rockhampton for the event. And she was very moved. She actually wrote half a page in the logbook for me. But as I said, while I was down here, history jumped out of this boat every day and smacked me in the face. I had about 30 people come up to me and say that either worked on the boat or they had connections with the boat. I had the fellow that, the original owner, Rupert Den, has died back in about 1987 or so, and the previous owner to me died as I bought the boat as a deceased estate, but there were 3 owners in between and I've met them all now.
It's like a lemon.
Oh, that's off the bottom end of Tasmania. That's 3 islands from the right, round top, flat top, and the far one down on the left is Mewstone. That's further away to the south. But now this is just near Matsyka Island, which is off the bottom end of Tasmania in the Great Southern Ocean. Look how calm it is.
Is it sort of more towards the eastern side or the western side? Or
Right off the bottom, right off the bottom of Tasmania. That's Matsyka Island. Now this is where we were going. This is across the bottom of Tasmania. This is Matsyka Island here. The Big Witch is there, which I'll talk about. It's actually DeWitt Island, but it's generally known as the Big Witch. We came across here. When we came across, we left Hobart at 6:30 in the morning. The usual routine is 50 miles down to Research Bay, which is sort of over here. Most people go down and spend the night in Research Bay, which is where they found the James Cray, and it's spelled R-E-C-H-E-R-C-H-E, French. And then it's 10 hours from there around. Well, we got to Research Bay at 2:30 in the afternoon. It was too early to stop. It was a beautiful day. Why stop? So we carried on. We got to about here at sunset. And we went round Southwest Cape at 9:30 at night. No, 8:30 at night. We dropped anchor here in Bramble Cove at midnight. And that's a wild, rocky bit of coast with quite a few islands and rocks off there. We were navigating by chart plotter on this. and it proved to be effective. We didn't hit anything.
That's a good thing, Tom.
It was. Now, somebody suggested that I should mention some of the radio stuff that we did, which is very relevant to this club. We did use HF on a couple of occasions. In Bass Strait, I tried to call both Tamar Radio in Hobart, but could only get Brisbane, but they were happy enough to relay the message down for me on about 8 megs. Is anyone here familiar with AIS?
Yep.
A couple are. Okay, well we had AIS and it worked remarkably well. I have become familiar with it. I'd heard of it, but I'd never worked with it when I was working on the harbour. But since then it's been fitted to all the Sydney ferries. There is a website, marinetraffic.com. If you look at that, it'll show you where all sorts of boats are, all the commercial ones that are fitted with AIS. AIS comes in 2 forms, A and B. A is fitted to all commercial vessels over 300 tonnes. B is fitted, that's enforced by law since about 2008, I think. The B, which is a slightly less version, is a bit less expensive, is optionally fitted by choice to pleasure boats and non-passenger vessels, small non-passenger vessels. We have the B series, and it worked remarkably well and saved us some interesting things in the middle of the night in Bass Strait and the like, with collision situations. Because radar will tell you there's a blob, there's something there. The AIS will give you its name, its collision potential straight away, and for those who don't know about it, it runs on VHF. There's a little computer and a VHF antenna. You can have a splitter and run it on your marine VHF antenna, but the splitter costs more than an antenna. So if you've got the space on the cabin top, put up a separate antenna for it, and it transmits your vessel's details, which you have to key into it, on a continuous basis, frequency depending on your speed. The faster you go, the more often it transmits you position, direction and speed. And it listens to anyone else who is transmitting similar information, then puts it all together, stirs it up in the pot and tells you what is a problem and what is not. And if anyone wants a demonstration of it, it's fitted on Lyndenne, and we can have a look at it one day as a club activity if you wish. Anyway, getting back to this, we got into Bramble Cove up here, which is there at midnight, and dropped anchor. Oh, sorry, this is out of order. That's Southwest Cape. That's the corner we went round in the dark. Dodged those rocks too. That's the Big Caroline. That's just south of... I took this photo later because we went past that in the dark. And that's the entrance into Port Davey. Now, Port Davey is this magnificent harbour. There's no road to it. It's a 4-day walk from civilization, and the only other way is by fishing boat. So it's a pretty wild sort of country. There was one tin miner, one or two tin miners that worked in the back area of Port Davey, Melaleuca Creek, and we'll have a look at that a little bit shortly. But I was lucky enough while I was down there to meet his daughter, both his daughters. Now that's the Breaksea Islands. That's what protects Bathurst Harbour from the Great Southern Ocean, which, if you look west from there, the next land that you would see is South America.
West. Wow.
3/4 of the way around the world. So you can get some very big seas there. Just north of there, they're up near Macquarie Harbour, they've got a wave rider buoy where they have recorded 20-metre high waves.
Okay.
Not only once. That's Balmoral Beach.
Overpriced fish and chips. Where the parking meters?
There aren't any there, there isn't a road. This is inside Bathurst Harbour, of course, or Port Davey. Port Davey, Bathurst Harbour. Port Davey is the outside bit and Bathurst Harbour is the inner bit. That's Celery Top Islands. That's inside the bay. We went in there and went right up close, which you can do, to the island. You shouldn't go ashore, there's protected area. This boat, Lyndenne, worked in this area. They didn't fish for crayfish in the port, they fished along the coast outside, but they came in here for shelter, and the one of the fisherman's best friend was Clyde Clayton, who was also a fisherman, and he had a cottage here that he built down here at Ocean Pier. Now that's inside there, just off his house. That's the same boat on the same wharf 50 years before.
That's awesome.
It's stuck there.
That's Clyde's house, and in there there's a logbook for visitors. Clyde died about 2005.
Is that his Barbie?
Yes.
That's a serious smokestack.
Yeah. He ended up marrying Denny King's sister. Denny King was a tin miner who lived about 6 miles away with a tin mine, and there are stories of him taking his tin round, the tin that he mined round to Hobart in a sailing boat a bit bigger than mine, not much. And when he was unloading it in Hobart, fellow saw him, thought he was struggling with 2 bags of tin on it, one on each shoulder. So I thought he'd give him a hand. He couldn't pick one up. But they're lovely people, and I had the pleasure of meeting both of Denny King's daughters, because one of them launched a video for an acquaintance of mine, and obviously a good friend of hers, about crayfishing in southern Tasmania. And my boat actually features in that DVD, which I didn't bring tonight because I didn't think we'd have time to go through it, but it's got some wonderful photos of the area and a lot of information about crayfishing. That's one of the tracks up the hill to look at the view. You can walk up all these hills. It's pretty rugged sort of country though. Yes, the catamaran was called Homeless.
So, sorry Tom, so the
Yeah.
other fellow was a tin miner.
Yes.
What did this chap do that lived there? What did he do?
Is a fisherman, a cray fisherman.
Okay, professional cray fisherman.
Yes,
Okay.
as was the owner of my boat. They had a wet well in the middle of the boat that would hold maybe 1,000 crayfish, like about 5 tons of water, with holes in the bottom, through the bottom of the boat, so the water would roll over. And when I bought the boat, this wet well was leaking into the engine room, and I took it out, and I actually had to spend $4,000 on new hewn pine to replace the planks where the holes were all drilled through the bottom of the boat.
Plus a bit of lead.
Yes, about 4 tonnes of lead.
Resistance is futile.
Mount Misery, Mount Rugby. There's a foot track to the top of that. Now here at the Narrows, they keep 2 dinghies, so you can see one over there among the trees, and you have to leave one on either side. So if you want, it's for bushwalkers so they can get across. So you go across, you get the dinghy on the other side, you bring it back, and then you go back across. So to get across, you've got to cross 3 times. So you leave a dinghy on each side. That's us anchored in Schooner Cove. Yeah, so that's him going ashore for a walk at Schooner Cove. This is southeast by, just out of Port Davey, going up the north coast. We went up the west coast, I should say, a bit to look at the wreck of the Svenor, S-V-E-N-O-R, that was coming round from Fremantle to Newcastle in ballast, and they got into trouble. The ballast shifted, and the ship took, it was an old sailing ship, took on a bad list, and they couldn't sail it, and the crew ended up being rescued by another vessel, and the ship was, they thought it would sink, but it didn't, and it ended up on the beach. Oh, that's a rock called the little island rock sticking up out of the middle, called the Coffee Pot. There's the remains of the Svenor, erected in 1914. There's not much of it left. There were, it was all the pickers and fishermen have had their go at borrowing whatever it was worth getting. There's Horseshoe Reef. Remarkably, it's as straight as a ruler.
That was the only bit you could see.
Yeah. Now these fishermen rescued us on one occasion when the outboard failed on the dinghy when we went exploring, and it was a hard row, so they towed us back in the dinghy with the outboard. But and I persuaded them to have a cold can each by way of thanks, and then a couple of days later we came across them again, and were anchored nearby, and they came over in the dinghy and said, we need some help. I said, yeah, if we can. He said, we've got too much stripy trumpeter. Could you eat a couple of fillets for us? I said, I think this man deserves another beer. But yeah, some very nice people down there, generous, and I think the fact that the boat was so well known contributed somewhat. That was it again on another day. This is New Harbour. This is on the way back. We went into New Harbour. That's on the south coast, round east of Southwest Cape. That's DeWitt Island, also known as the Big Witch. Now, that's the only place you can land on the island, on the north coast of the island, and history relates that a young hippie girl decided to set up camp there and live in seclusion on the island, but she was looked after by the fishermen, and she in turn looked after the fishermen. One suspected she probably had a nice little patch of dope growing there and so on, and disported herself in suitable styles of undress when the weather was suitable, but that's the only spot you can get ashore. It's quite a big island, about a mile and 2 miles long maybe, quite high in the... Well, that was departing Hobart for Sydney. Went back to Hobart and had a week or so, a few days there, then came back to Sydney with a crew of... now on the way south we had my dear wife, she bit the bullet and came. And the son came down too, and we had another friend from the Wooden Boat Association. So there was 4 on the trip south, and I had 3 on the way back. Had Maury Flappin, who, if you're interested in boat history of boats, he has a website, boatregister.net, where he's got listed something like 50,000 boats that were built before the rash of production boats, like no Rivieras or those sort of things. They're all wooden boats or steel boats that were built basically prior to 1965. My boat is listed there too, but...
How do you do the shifts, Tom?
Oh, it varied. Watches, mostly 6 on, 6 off during the day, and 3 on, 6 off at night. Although coming back when we were at sea at night, there was a bunk in the wheelhouse, so there are always 2 in the wheelhouse. I mean, the second one may well be asleep, but he was immediately there if needed. And on the way back, the
So it took you 48 hours really to cross what was basically Bass Strait.
yeah, probably a bit less, but from where we dropped anchor to where we dropped anchor, 48 hours. Yeah. That's the Iron Pot. Probably the second oldest light in Australia.
Where is it, Tom?
That's in
Just south of Hobart. We're at the mouth of the Derwent River, technically. Then we're punching into a bit of a short chop. Now, one of the lucky breaks that I had, and I have had a lot of lucky breaks with this boat, when we were coming up from Hobart in the Spirit of Tasmania, this is a little bit out of context with this, but when the Spirit of Tasmania ran out of Sydney, it was absolutely magic, because you could drive onto the ship in Sydney and drive off in Devonport. Well, coming in one day on the way back after working on the Old Girl, going past Clifton Gardens, I saw the Pong Su there. The Pong Su was a North Korean ship that came in with a load of drugs.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah,
Down a White Bay for a while.
Yeah, it was a White Bay for a long time. The customs and the police tracked it off the Victorian coast, chased it to Newcastle, where they put Navy staff on board by helicopter and arrested it. It went into Newcastle, then down to Sydney. It was in Sydney for 4 or 5 years while they sorted out the legals of it. But effectively the North Korean government had sent it down with a load of drugs to offload in Victoria, which they did, and they were caught doing it. A couple of tons of heroin.
No, sneaking ashore in IRBs or something?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, that's right. When I saw it, it was, on this occasion, it was getting ready to be disposed of, and they'd taken it out 140 miles southeast of Jervis Bay and bombed it. But before that, when we were going in on the Spirit of Tasmania, I saw that had these 2 round Clearview screens in the bridge. Now, Clearview screen is a bit of round glass that spins and throws all the water off like it's better than a windscreen wipe, but it's only a fairly limited area. That's where I got my Clearview screen.
Off the Pong Su?
Yeah. But there was a problem. The wires were cut off right at the electric motor, and there was no sign of what voltage it was. So I ended up taking it to, unfortunately he's retired and shut up the business now, but excellent, monophase electrics at DY West. He said, yeah, he said, oh yeah, he said, this is 110 volt. So I had to get an inverter from America. You can't buy a 110 volt output inverter in Australia. And so it runs there.
Should also mention that the radio off the Pong Sues that John O'Toole up at the Currajong Radio Museum, he's got it there.
Oh, that's it.
That's
got
The whole works.
Yeah, that's where my Clearview screen came from.
Tuned into the Democratic Free Republic Military.
And we went into escaping from Hobart in a small boat. The best way, weather permitting, is out through Dunalley Canal
Shit through to Port Harbour.
and the Marion Narrows. But when we got to that area, it's about 10 miles from Dunalley Canal, where you have to get a bridge open to get through. Dunalley Canal actually was dug by the convicts. And the bridge, when we were coming south, the bridge was closed because it had been burnt by the bushfires. And on the way back out at this stage, the weather forecast was for 3 metre swell from the northeast, breaking on Marion Narrows. So no, not going out there. So I had to go down south. But we went into Port Arthur because I have a cousin there. That's a long story. We won't go into that. But I've got a cousin that lives there, and he invited us to call in for a barbecue. So we went in for a barbecue, and that's Cape Pillar. That's on the way out. As the Hippolyte Rock now, there's 3 metres or so swell running there. That's why you can't see the water's edge at it. That's Maria Island, and behind it Freycinet Peninsula. The old lonely albatross. Flinders Island over there in the cloud. The Inner Sister. Yes, we went in and anchored there for the night at House Bay.
Oh, there's your clear view window thing.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. I knew we'd see it sometime. There is actually a house, there's just a little island, there's 2 of them, the inner sister and the outer sister. And in the morning when we woke up, there was a thick fog. From this you can see there's a bit of a fog sitting down the hill there, but we woke up in the morning, the thick fog, and as we took off, I had we had about 100 metres visibility, I guess. I had the radar on and the AIS going, and as soon as we pulled out of the bay, the AIS went mad, said collision, very close. There's a, and this is what came out of the fog. The Ocean Shield.
That's quite a ship, isn't it?
It's now at Garden Island. It's been chartered by the Navy for patrol duties.
I think we own it now, Tom. They bought it.
Did they?
They leased it for a while.
Yeah.
And I think they bought it now.
Yeah. I suspect it was leased or was doing something looking around. It was certainly way out of oil rig territory when we found it. And this is going across Bass Strait, or the eastern side of Bass Strait. It wasn't too rough, it was pretty calm, it was pretty good. We had a couple of line squalls coming up that they sort of went overhead and disappeared without too much drama. Then we didn't stop at Eden, we were plugged straight on. So, the weather's good, we'll just keep going. We'll stop if we need to. 4 o'clock in the morning I took over the wheel, and we're just off Wreck Bay, which is south of Jarvis Bay. And as we came around Governor Head, the wind changed to the south and started freshening, and by the time we were going up past Point Perpendicular, it was starting to get a bit uncomfortable, so we went into Crookhaven Bight to stop for breakfast and look at the weather map and see what we were going to do. And the only really sensible decision was to run for Wollongong. We could have gone back into Jarvis Bay and sought shelter on the south side between HMAS, whatever it is down there, Creswell and the Point, but there was no shops there, there was nothing there. We looked like being there for a few days with the weather. So we ran for Wollongong, at least the sea was behind us, we weren't punching into it.
Would you be going to go into Crookhaven?
Sorry?
Would you have been going to go into Crookhaven?
No, no, into
Crookhaven's where
Point.
Calburra is, isn't it?
Sorry?
Crookhaven Heads is where Calburra.
Yeah, it's the end
Yeah.
of the Shoalhaven, basically.
Yeah. No, that's Greenwell Point, that's a little bit further up.
Yeah.
No, we decided not to.
It's pretty narky.
Yeah. That's about a 4 to 5 metre sea. That's when we were off Kiama. Then into the safety of Belmore Basin at Wollongong. Managed to one of the crew, Wayne Tyrrell. Now see the sort of thing that happens. I first met Wayne when we were working on the boat at Launceston. No, before that, before we got to Launceston, when I first bought the boat at when it was up at Beauty Point in the north end of the Tamar River. Wayne had climbed the mast for me because we had no halyard in the mast to pull anything up. And the first time after we left Launceston and gone round to Hobart in '09, he happened along and he did the trip up north with me in '09 after the wooden boat show when I brought the boat up. And who was the first person that turned up at the wooden boat show this time? Wayne Tyrrell. So I said to him, I knew he had a mother that lived up here. He was working down in Tasmania. He'd like to come up to see his mother. I said, you want another trip north? He said, yeah. He said, I could be persuaded. So he'd come up, and he's a good sailor. He'd done a bit of single handing, and he'd done a lot of time under sail, so he's a good person to have on board. Then, now this is where it got interesting, because we're just approaching Botany Bay after 3 days in Wollongong, and coming up past Cape Bailey, I went through the mental process of saying to myself, now, should I call Botany, Port Control, to ask them what their shipping movements are, because there's quite a lot of shipping going in and out. And as I was contemplating this option, they called me by name because they had me on AIS. It does work, and it works damn well. They said, Lyndenne, this is Botany Port Control, what are your intentions? I said, well, I'm proceeding to the north. What shipping movements do you have so that I can keep clear of them? He said, oh, we've got 2 ships going out and 1 coming in. I said, okay, I'm aware of that. I have radar, I have obviously AIS, and I said, I'm keeping a good lookout. I will keep clear of the shipping. So it just proved, it's just another layer of safety. Rolling up the coast. That's North Head in the background. As Ben Buckler just closed here, then North Head beyond. And arrival at Newport home. In the 2 months we were away, almost 2 months to the day, we did 2,000 nautical miles.
How much was on sail and how much was on the engine?
Almost all on the engine. We had the sails up now and then, but only when we were able to run with the wind astern. The boat was built to sail and did sail very well, but when they added the bulwarks, because now it's got bulwarks about 18, 19 inches high with a pipe rail on top, but that's not relevant. They moved the chain plates up from the hull, and the chain plates are mainly on the bulwarks now, and I don't feel they're strong enough to put too much stress on. It looks very good, but I don't think it's as strong as it could be. So I tend to be a bit gentle with the sails. But having said that, when we were down off, just before we got to Bateman's Bay on the way south, we had all the sails up, main end a big jib, and we had a squall of 45 knots out of the northwest. So it was rather a hurry to get the sails down. But she went remarkably well running. I was rather concerned how it was going to handle a big sea from astern, but that's the most dangerous in many respects because you can broach and so on. But no, it handled that very well. The biggest waves we saw were about 5 metres. They were from astern. The biggest waves from ahead. When we left Gaybo Island going south, we had up to 3.5 metres, I suppose, on the bow, but the waves weren't very close. There was enough to go up and down over them without shipping too much spray over the bow. Any questions?
Tom, with the AIS, it transmits on channel 70. Do you
Yes.
find that it interferes on channel 16? Like you hear the data packet go out?
No.
No, fair income, that's good, eh?
Mm. Well, I have the antenna for the AIS much lower,
Right.
or 12 feet lower
Right.
than the antenna for the radio.
Right.
What are the bunks set up on there? I missed it at the beginning.
There's a big V berth down forward, right up forward. Then there's 2 bunks aft of that, one either side. They're singles, and one in the wheelhouse. So you can sleep 5 plus anyone else on a mattress on the floor. Yes.
How much fuel did you use?
A litre a mile. Doing 6 knots, we use, or 6.5 knots, we use about 6 litres an hour, 6.5 litres an hour, effectively a litre a mile, which is, for a boat of that size, very economical. About as good as you can get, I think. But does 6 knots, 6.5 knots very reliably, and the Gardner engine was installed in 1968, and when I was down in Hobart, one of the nicest people that was very helpful to me was the fellow who with his father installed the engine in 1968. So yeah, it was amazing, and the history, as I say, just jumped out of the boat every day and smacked me in the face.
You should write a book about it.
Well, I am actually. That is the next challenge. I've written up from the log and diary this trip, which was, as I say, 2 months. I've written that up in fair detail. The next challenge is actually to write the history of the boat. And I have got, when I was down there at the Wooden Boat Festival, and yes, I do hope to go again in 2 years' time, or 18 months' time now, because it's on every 2nd February in odd years. And if you want to go, it's well worth it, but you want to book your accommodation at least 12 months ahead.
Take it with you.
Or take it with you, yes. It's very, very busy. I think they had something like 200,000 people through the festival, which was quite a big crowd for Tasmania, for Hobart. And speaking about that, I understood that it was the biggest event of its type in the Southern Hemisphere. I've now been reasonably reliably told is the biggest wooden boat event in the world. And they had 550 boats there this year, and they're looking to move it so they got more space for next time. Although I don't know where they could move it to, because there'd be nothing that would have the ambience that Constitution Dock and that area right in Hobart have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question. You mentioned when you're coming back that you ducked into Wollongong.
Yes.
Obviously, the vessel itself is very seaworthy, so it's just uncomfortable. Is that the only reason? You don't have concerns about the seaworthiness?
No, I don't have concerns about the seaworthiness. It worked across the bottom of Tasmania for something like 40 years in all sorts of weathers. And when I bought it, soon after I bought it, when I was working on it, one of the old fishermen came up and said, "Oh," he said, "I remember this boat before they put the higher bulwarks on it. It was originally the bulwarks or the bits along the side above the deck were only about so high." He said, "We used to call it over 1 and under 9. But no, it was mainly for comfort. The weather, it was all strong wind warnings, southerlies, big seas, and it was really for comfort, apart from the fact that it would be fair to say that I like to be very gentle with the boat because of its age, its history, and the desire to preserve it. Yes, Don?
Tom, were you listening on the HF on the marine channels on the way up the coast, or just VHF?
Both, but
What HF channels do you listen to now?
well, it depended. 4125 and 81 something. I just forget now. Seem to need 8 to talk to Charlie. We'll see. Unfortunately, now there is no system of coast stations like there used to be, and most of it runs through either Charleville or Willoona. Willoona's West Australia, but Charleville, I mean, Marine Rescue up here don't listen to HF unless they're asked to, or unless there's a boat goes out and tells them it wants a sked with them.
Okay.
They don't listen. Hobart does.
Hobart's got a couple of really good volunteer stations.
Yeah, no, they've got one now. The other one was absorbed, shall we say.
Alright.
There's only one, Coast Radio Hobart. They're remarkably good, and they've got a great range of repeaters. I mean, even into Port Davey you can get Channel 16 and weather reports on VHF. They're trying to cover right across Bass Strait with VHF as well, both from Eden and Tamar Coast Radio, which has got a repeater up on mountain just out of Georgetown. So they say, "Oh, don't bother with the HF, call us on VHF." But I do like to use the VHF, and I would like as well, if I could, to get the club frequency, the 7045, but I'm told it can't put into the marine radio because of the design of the channels.
We'll sort something out, Tom.
But it would be nice to have. I mean, I've got an antenna tuner, and it's an ICOM M700, which is about 20 years old. But all the harmonics and everything, all the filters and everything are set up for the marine frequencies, and the amateur frequencies come right in the sort of in the middle between the marine frequencies, which are on basically even megahertz, whereas the amateur frequencies are on odd ones. So I mean, I've got the keys there. You can key a frequency in, but you wouldn't get the output, I'm sure.
And it'd be the wrong side beam too, Tom.
What is the radio you use?
A ICOM M700.
Oh, okay.
Yes. The random length of wire goes between the top of the mizzen mast and the top of the main mast.
And then comes down one of them to the tuner. Where's the tuner?
The tuner's in the back of the wheelhouse. The lead
So it's an L.
comes down the mizzen mast.
The inverted L is basically what your
Yes.
receiver is, right?
Yeah.
And the ground side of the tuner is connected to the hull or what?
To an earth plate in the hull.
It's salty.
Now I've got a chart up here if anyone wants to have a look at Tasmania, but there's some absolutely spectacular places for those of you who haven't been to Tasmania. I can only recommend it as a fantastic place to go to. And from here you've got two options basically. You can either fly down and hire a car when you get there, or you can drive to Melbourne and get the ferry across and take as much camping stuff as you like in your car on the ferry. We used the ferry option. I had the car full of tools and stuff for the boat all the time. The drive to Melbourne is a killer. I hate it. We did it in one day initially, leaving at 5 in the morning to be down there at to go on the ferry at 6 o'clock at night, but seeing a fatal on the way one day down in Victoria sort of persuaded us it wasn't such a good idea, and we'd leave midday, drive to Gundagai, sleep overnight there, and then push on the next day and make it a comfortable 2-day trip. I mean, 2 drivers, you can do it in one day, but it's not.
It takes me 9 hours door to door at the moment.
Sorry?
It takes me 9 hours door to door.
You got truckies bloody near though.
Yeah.
I hope you stop for the submarine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously they're Toyota.
I think they've upgraded the road a bit in the past.
Pump the tyres.
Have they put the bypass in now?
Yes, that's a boat they're running.
Just open.
There was their bypass. We had a lot of roadworks when we were going down there from the southern half of the state. It was all roadworks where they were widening. I presume they're finished by now. But
Pretty good run.
no, that's the old boat, and if you want to come out one day, well, I'm sure we can organise a cruise. I can carry up to 10. 10's getting a bit crowded. I do actually carry 12 life jackets on board, so we can carry 12, but that's getting a bit crowded, I think. But if you want to come out one day, just,
You're on, Tom.
Yep, sounds like something to plan. So Tom, you're also doing Canoe Classic.
Yes, now that's something else I want to talk about. I really need probably 2 operators, one to work with me and 1 or 2 on another checkpoint, which I'm not sure of yet, but Gary Barker I can't think of his
It won't be on your boat, will it?
1 will be, yes. I want 1 to back me up because I don't have the technical knowledge. We've got several VHF frequencies, amateur frequencies, plus hopefully 70 centimetres, which I've got no experience with, and when I've tried to use it, I've run into problems with codes and so on to get into it. You lent me a radio one year and I just couldn't get it to operate. I need somebody to help me. You'll be on a very comfortable large timber motor cruiser, not my boat. Mine won't fit under the bridge. And I know that Canoe Classic is a major exercise for Wyson. One of their major exercises. The other one is the City to Surf, I think, or it was. But they do the Canoe Classic. It is life-saving, it is life-critical at times because people get hypothermia, and we've had a couple of close calls where I am.
There's always the crazy on the bend with the shotgun too.
And where are you in the classic?
At Gunderman, which is checkpoint Lima. Unfortunately, I don't have a slide with a map of the river on it, but we're about 30 kilometres from the finish. Canoe Classic, for those who haven't heard of it, is a fundraising deal for the Arrow Foundation, which supports bone marrow transplants for cancer victims, a very worthwhile cause. There's about 600 people paddling in about 400 canoes from Windsor to Brooklyn overnight.
111 kilometres?
Yeah, 111 kilometres.
What's the date again?
It's the last weekend in October, the 26th, 27th of October. There are about 20 checkpoints down the river, alphabetically from Alpha up at Windsor down to about Tango down at Brooklyn. We're at Lima, which is, as I say, Gunderman. We're in a very isolated part of the river. The nearest emergency access is actually about 5 kilometres upstream, where we can get a helicopter in for an evacuation. We've had 2 close calls with hypothermia, with people almost dying. The first one went out by road ambulance before we organised or knew we could get helicopter access, but he came to us basically unconscious. We had him on board for 10 minutes and decided to call an ambulance because we got no response then. He was taken down the river about 5 kilometres to where we could get ashore by the road. The ambulance took something like an hour to find us, and the fellow, I'm told, woke up the next morning in Gosford Hospital with tubes hanging out of him all over the place. He said, "How did I get here?" His last memory was Wiseman's Ferry. So
If anyone's never done the event, it's really well worth doing. It's great fun, very interesting, technically interesting as well.
yeah,
Radio conditions change during the night on VHF and UHF, and things that did work don't, and then other things start to. So you've got to sort of be a bit nimble on the bands. I've done it a few years. I was going to do it last year.
SKY does it on a regular
Richard
basis.
does it regularly. A few others do it regularly in the club. It's really great. Fun, interesting.
I would like one person as backup with me, and I'm sure that the Canoe Classic Wyson people would welcome any other volunteers for elsewhere. There are, some of them are land-based stations, they're not all on boats.
If you can only do it for a shorter period of time,
Further up the river.
where you get the closest to the start.
Yeah,
So you
that's
go-
right.
And then I've been on ones that pack up about 2 AM, then you bail home.
And if anyone is interested, I have, these are last year's handbooks. I've got 3 of them. So, no, it is a worthwhile, it is the 26th, 27th of October. I'm looking for 2 more boats. I'm not in the organising committee of the event, but they seem to think that I'm good at finding extra boats as well as extra radio operators. So personally, I've gone to the Royal Motor Yacht Club and a couple of other organisations to see if we can get a couple more owners of boats for checkpoints. But there's a map there of the river which shows where all the checkpoints are with the land crew bit. Because each paddler has to have a land crew to follow them to meet them at the major checkpoints, but we're what's called a minor checkpoint, and we provide anything the paddler needs. The committee provide us with tea and coffee and biscuits and things to offer the paddlers, plus I have a couple of friends who are very good first aid people, which I'm not. I have a first aid certificate, but my attitude is there's somebody that's better at first aid than I am, so I'll guide the traffic or do something else useful, but I'll let other people handle the blood and guts. But we have some very good first aid people, and the other thing is radio operators, because what we have to do with the radios for this event is every canoe has a 3-digit number from 100 to 550 or thereabouts, if there's 450 canoes, and each canoe is passed on by radio as it passes a checkpoint to the next checkpoint downstream, so they get the number, or a number of numbers, as due soons. And they've got a time. If they don't see them within a given time, they've got to send out a search boat to search for them to make sure they're still alive. But often you get, if somebody's got problems, another canoe will tell you that the canoe's back up there a mile or 2 miles, and he needs help, or he's all right, he's struggling, but he's bailed the canoe out and he's paddling on or something. But we have to have a chase boat and go looking for people. But then when the canoe passes us, they're supposed to come within 20 metres of the boat, call out their number so we can record it as arrived, and then pass it on to the next checkpoint by radio as a left here, which to them is a due soon. So you've got this radio traffic going all night, all down the river. And
They need AIS, that's what they need.
They've put trackers on. They've tried putting trackers on a couple of the canoes for as experimental.
APRS, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Richard was much into that.
It's interesting because you've got each checkpoint talking to the next checkpoint, handing off canoes, you know. Canoes 550, 449, blah blah blah, due soon at Delta. And so you're recording all that information, but you also got a net that works right across the whole system. Everyone can log into this net. It's done by mountaintop repeaters all the way from Barrowra through to Wiseman's at a number of hills.
Actually, a repeater of a Carriagong they use.
It moves around every couple of years depending on how the surveys go.
Yeah.
So, and they're all connected together. So there's the occasional checkpoint that can't get into that net, has to pull out through the next checkpoint. It's handling all that sort of stuff. It's just an ongoing process. It's good fun. You learn a lot.
Well, we had
radio technique is really good.
We had 3, in Lima we normally have 3 radios running at the same time, because we get information about due soons from Kilo by amateur 2 metre, but we pass it on to Mike. Mike doesn't have an amateur, so he has to get it by Marine VHF. So it's all go, and at Lima we see our first canoe maybe at 11 o'clock at night, and we have 4 people in it. They'll be doing about 8 knots, and the record for the event is 7 hours 12 minutes for 110 kilometres.
So we might, if there's anyone that's interested to have a chat with you, and we'll send out your details and get more information to the wider club members.
Yes, please.
But until then, thanks very much for this presentation. Really, really appreciate it.